People can't buy a home, people can't afford food. Price of oil and energy is now starting to ramp back up again. So it's playing out right now, and there's nothing that can be done to stop this inflation.
So everyone's peak Bitcoin versus ETH right now, but then there's the magic of the ETF, and people are so predictable. So right now, everyone's front running the Bitcoin ETF. And exactly as you say, Ovi, the next thing that's going to happen, the moment that is out, it'll be, fuck, the ETH ETF is coming.
Yep.
And all of that capital that was front running that will just be washed into the ETH trade, which will hypercharge that wedge and kicks off towards the summer.
The economy is completely out of control, right? So even the interest on the debt in the U.S. is now over $1 trillion. So I think it's the biggest line item on the budget, bigger than the military. So there's, what we were told for decades was, trickle down economics or what have you. They're going to grow the economy, and the increased tax revenues, we're going to pay down our debt. That was the theory for years. That they're going to stimulate aggregate demand, and it's going to cause GDP growth, which will increase tax revenues, and we're going to pay down our debt. Well, that never, ever, ever happened, and it predictably never happened. It was just about printing more money and a lot of malinvestment, that is to say, thieving going on, and the capital disappearing. Trillions of dollars just going into a global black hole controlled by the big four accounting firms, this floating casino that never pays taxes, which is now over $30 trillion in big, right? There's always only two possible pathways. Either you enter into a fatal type of hyperinflation, or you're just going to default across the board and you go into a deflationary depression. So it's a depression in either way. It's either an inflationary depression, like you see in like a Zimbabwe, or it's a deflationary depression like you had in the 1930s. But either way, the quality of life is deteriorating, and it's doing so in the US in a big way. And so, and there's nobody's coming forward with any solutions, because it's past having a solution. Meanwhile, there are now 3 or 4 candidates for president and other political offices that are talking about Bitcoin, right? So RFK Jr. talks about Bitcoin. Ron DeSantis talks about Bitcoin. Cynthia Lummis has also been talking about Bitcoin. So the political class is beginning to see Bitcoin as part of the solution going forward. And as you start to get into more of a Bitcoin frame of mind, this will be a transition from the fiat money world to a Bitcoin standard, and it'll be driven I don't see it taking decades, because it'll be the result of another colossal wave of bank failures, which is baked into the cake, really. The banks are insolvent. They're held together with accounting chicanery. There's nothing there. The central banks are completely devoid of any assets whatsoever. They're leveraged worse than Enron. I think the Federal Reserve is leveraged 90-1 or something like that. It's completely the Bank of Japan, which is really the linchpin central bank in the world. If you want to know really, and you want to follow the global central bank, you would follow the Bank of Japan, because they've always been the funding currency for many decades now, where other central banks would borrow from the Bank of Japan and invest in higher yielding currencies in what's called the carry trade, and to try to extract another 20 or 30 basis points.
Interesting. Yeah, that to me is an incredibly interesting chart, because I actually draw the wedge coming up from 2017 low through the 2020 lows. This is what I'm really interested in.
Holy shit.
If this is right, this is a fucking massive wedge pattern. And we're putting in the stuff that I look at, DeMark indicators, everything else. They're suggesting the low comes this week, next week, the week after. So I'm thinking that the narrative around ETH is going to be wrong. It's going to catch people offside. People have basically, because there's been no new money in the space, So they've sold their ETH to buy Bitcoin because of the ETF, right? And this point in the cycle. Makes sense, fine. Then what happens is the ETF is announced. What is everybody going to do after the Bitcoin ETF is announced? Every trader is going to switch their bet from Bitcoin to ETH. And that changes the dynamic. Now, ETH has been kind of, as I said, struggling around a bit. But once it clears 1900, it gets really interesting. I think I put out a chart yesterday on the ETH chart on my Twitter feed. So what we've got is, it's an Elliott wave chart, and it's a beautiful technical pattern of this lovely kind of flag. So Elliott wave, you tend to get 5 wave advances, ABC declines in a bull market. So you had this wave up 1, it retraces all the way back down, doesn't make a new low. That's a wave 2. Then you start on what is a wave 3. Wave 3s are the big dynamic waves. But within that, it breaks down to subwaves. So this was wave 1. Wave 2 was the correction. And now if you break that, you go into what's known in the most exciting thing of Elliott wave is a 3 of 3. That's where you get the double acceleration point. What we've just seen in Solana feels like it's going to happen in ETH. Particularly now everybody's underweight ETH. People have seen the Solana move. Let's say the Bitcoin ETF comes. You break that trend line, which is about 1900. And before you know it, you're on your way to 2,500 and beyond.